Welcome to an episode of Black Representation in the Curriculum, conversations on teaching, culture, equity, and belonging. This podcast was rebranded from Learning for Truth and Love, mainly because I wanted to make sure that the goals and motivated thinking behind this podcast was truly clear. And so in rebranding, I've been focused on sharing out some of the past work that I've done, mainly because I'm going on to the next stage of this work. That will be revealed to you in time and as we go on. But I'm truly thrilled to have our guest today, Dr. Issac Carter. Um, I want to preface this having Dr. Carter here by saying Dr. Carter was like me in academia and no longer fully in higher ed, right? The higher ed space, rather. And I wanted to mention that because I know that I've had so many different people on here, people in academia, people outside of academia, and people in different spaces. And I really want to make sure it's clear to people that I do this because I'm open to different perspectives, no matter who people are. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm opposed to any other alternative perspectives.
Mhm.
And that's really important to know. Um, we really wouldn't understand any problem or any challenge or any solutions without getting the full big picture. So, Dr. Carter, without me saying any more, I want to welcome you and ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. My name is Issac Carter. As Catherine shared with you, I've had some different career choices that I made over the course of my life that included higher education, some nonprofit leadership with communities statewide. And then my venture in coaching imperative became affiliated as a business in the state of Florida in May of 2020. And so I
Well,
started my business right during the pandemic. Obviously didn't know that was going to happen.
hmm
But it was a good thing for me in the sense I was making a transition out of higher education. I was trying to find my niche in a way. And because of the pandemic, I got an opportunity to expand myself in terms of people I work with and coach, not only in the US, but people from other parts of the world, which has been a very dynamic experience. And then I'm still navigating this whole post higher education, still involved in terms of I still do presentations or do speaking engagements for organizations. I still actually, for a couple of journals, I do reviews. I think that's a good thing to keep me in practice of reading what scholarships coming out and staying linked in
hmm
that way. And then I'm producing my own things now. I started Coaching Imperative and I have a new initiative called Black Emotional Intelligence, intelligence.com. And that's been taking up my time. And it's been a culmination of, I would say, all my work as well as all the things I've influenced in my family and learning history, et cetera, that has come into fruition. And I'm looking forward to continuing my own growth and development, but definitely sharing some information with you all today, the guests that are listening. So I thank you for having me on, Gab.
Absolutely. And I really want to dive into Black emotional intelligence. But before I get there, I do have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Um, I find your journey rather fascinating. And I wondered if you can highlight for the audience when it comes to your larger goals, right? Whether it's your larger research goals,
Mhm.
what you wanted to accomplish, what led you to leave you had a tenured position
Mhm.
where you were,
Yep.
because there were some goals that you wanted to achieve. So tell us about, what those goals were and what made you make that transition for what some might consider, better or more secure. And so how is it serving you now?
Yeah. So I think early in my career, I will say this: I was raised in a house with mom and dad, and I knew both sets of my grandparents and one set of my great grandparents. I say all that
Mhm.
to say that I come from a family of people who have, in different parts of their life, have shown some iterations of leadership and efforts toward justice, whether it be
Mm.
local campaigns, whether it be city government, whether it's working in the neighborhood block unit, whether it's working on issues like gentrification or youth violence and curfews, coming from watching my parents and friends and neighbors be active in that
Mhm.
way, it's been a core to who I am, which will kind of
Mm.
give you the through line in terms of what I've done, choices I've made in my
Right.
career. And so, I would say there's many iterations that started, but I think in higher education, when I first started working in higher education, I had been an RA for several years. And shout out to my father. He said once I became RA, he was like, you can't lose that job because that's room and board. So we don't want to pay for that. So that's why I was RA for 3 years. But the thing that happens during my time at a PWI really shaped the person I am in terms of one, how do I find my authentic voice and share when things are going awry?
Mm,
Rodney King was happening when I started college. I'm dating myself.
mhm,
But at that time, I could never ever think that it would be as bad. Then you see later on, you might have James Byrd, you have George Floyd, you got Breonna Taylor. You can just pick iterations of things I've always watched. I'm like, wow, how
mhm,
did things keep happening? But the
mhm,
frustrating part for me too about the higher education is that how much my friends and peers and students and faculty and staff knew about Black people, Black history, or even
mm,
people of color. So my
mm,
journey was started as many ones have an activist mindset, but have a
mm,
deep curiosity of learning about who I was as a person. Especially, I was trying to begin to find myself after leaving home to what kind of adult and what kind of human and professional I wanted to be. And those activities
mm,
led me into working with our school to get started. The first multicultural affairs office. It led to us having an annual Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, Women's History Month series that still exists at the university
mhm,
that I attended, that I helped start and initiate it as a student, working with the president. I must shout out to the Curitons, who were the president at the time, his wife, and took the president, Dr. Curiton, took a liking to me. They helped hone
mhm,
some of that. And then Mr.
mhm,
Richard Aisley was the first person who hired the director of multicultural affairs. And through there, I started my first retreat, where I was called Multicultural Retreat. And so it was my first experience leading my peers and friends in discussions about race, gender, class, sexuality, and really formative in my life. And from that, I've always had
mhm,
a justice leaning to whatever I do. So early in
mm,
my career, it was in multicultural affairs. Then I started
mm,
my own business early in my career in the Cultural Society Communications Group because I wanted to look at intercultural communication and the breakdown. Because
mhm,
many of the things I did was how do I survive? And then
mhm,
from learning how to survive myself, how do I
mhm.
thrive? And then
Wow.
that became the impetus to share the information, become a person who does training and learning things early in my life. So that's always been part of myself as a teacher. And
Mhm,
as a fan of hip hop, and my favorite group was Boogie Down Productions.
mhm,
KRS One has knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. It explains everything. That was part of my idol. And he had this song called Come to the Teacher. And I was like, "Ooh, if I'm gonna be an educator teacher, I wanna be like this." And someone who blends urban or roots or the soul of who you are in your work,
mhm,
but also can do it in a way that is entertaining and captivating and compelling so people actually wanna take part of it and listen. And I think
mhm,
that is really what has shaped my career. And so my choices have been multicultural affairs. And in multicultural affairs, I was told, "Don't do this again."
mm,
Mentor said, don't, because you don't want to peg yourself as only multicultural affairs. That led me
mm,
into housing, into leadership, because I wanted to be able to have a wider influence, not just for people of color in a group. I wanted to have institutional, because I understand that institutional practice policies shape
mhm.
the individual experiences. And that's a
Wow.
lesson I learned early on. And if you don't have access to resources, money, time, people, then you have very limited capacity to actually create change. And so as I
Mhm,
moved to different parts of my race in my career, I was seeking out different leadership opportunities to infuse what they call
mm.
DEI into everything we do. So for me, the DEI crisis,
Infused.
DEI, diversity, equity, and
Oh, okay,
inclusion
okay.
into
Mhm,
everything we
mhm,
do. And this is this post DEI where we're in. It's like for me, you can still do the work without the words. And the work was being
mhm.
done in very
Right.
intentional ways without having to signal and flag what you were doing.
Mhm,
And so my work has been always grounded in that. I don't need a DEI statement, don't need a mission statement. My own
mm,
in view of how I see myself in the world and the kind of person I want to be in the world is what grounds me and leads me to the choices I make. And ultimately,
mhm,
when I was doing higher education, I was also doing consulting. And
mm,
the myth of the liberal uh, higher education ethos
mm.
is very much a myth. So when I hear
Yes.
things publicly talking about liberal, but I don't know what schools they're talking about. I had to look if they're actually working at one of those.
I
Um,
feel the same way, by the way.
yeah.
It's amazing, I think. Yeah, I wonder where they get the impression that it is liberal. Um, I think, it's almost like people sell ideas to
Uh-huh.
suit the purpose and to suit the
Yes,
rhetoric that's being promoted at the time. But
mhm,
the reality of our experience is certainly not that liberal experience. But you said bunch of things here. So first of all, I want to point out when you mentioned the multicultural thing, I was actually invited to be um, nominated, I should say, by a colleague who I really appreciate and respect to be on a multicultural board of directors. And exactly what I suspected is exactly what happened. I did a little investigation with people I knew
mhm,
to figure out, what were some changes that were made, and shortly before, I found out that it took away the voting right, and so it's what I expect is to be invited to be in a ceremonial type of position, which I don't
mhm,
really do. The
yeah,
ceremonial thing, I don't really have time to waste in dancing in these roles.
yeah,
And so, I decided, nope, that's not for me. Wonderful titles, but, um, I don't waste my time.
yeah,
Um,
and then
but
it
you
becomes
did
a waste when you perform it that way.
absolutely. Yeah, it's you said a bunch of things. First of all, you mentioned PWI. For those who are not familiar, it's predominantly white institutions, or, historically white institutions. Um, you mentioned a bunch of things here. Your goal was to really try to find your authentic voice. And you mentioned a frustration with how much people knew about Black people. I'm guessing you mean how little, right?
Yeah, a
But
little, yeah.
what was, can you shed light a little bit on that journey to find your authentic voice? What did that mean to you? And
Yeah,
what were some challenges to overcome? And what did you do? Because I think that's something that people are, no matter where you are, I think we
mhm.
struggle with.
Yeah, I think in any iteration of a young person's life, you see people who can be role models for you, or you see people who are in roles you want to aspire to.
Mhm.
And so when I saw people in leadership, whether it be in the community or in the higher education setting, I was always interested in how they navigated who they were.
Mm.
Because sometimes I know, code switching is a thing we have to do, but
Mhm.
the people who I really admired had a way of not really doing it. They had a way of
Mhm.
blending in who they were, and they
Mhm.
had to then also be able to show up in ways that people respected them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how do you do that? Because so many times you're told you have to act a certain way when you're in
Right.
leadership or talk a certain way. And when I
Mhm.
saw people who were able to be down and cool and use colorful language, yet still have that scholarly rigor and substance behind what they said, I'm like, how do you get to this? And in talking to my mentors, part of all of that I saw came from a confidence in who they were.
Mm.
And the confidence in who they were was because they knew who they were. And
Mhm.
so for me, it
Mhm.
was very important to see that early on because I know that I'm a person who was going to say things out loud. I know as a person that was going to say things against the grain. I grew up in a
Right.
house where I felt very comfortable being me, but when that starts being tested
Mhm.
outside of the home, like what do you fall
Yeah.
back on? And that knowledge of self and knowledge
Mhm.
of of Black history from, not even just history of the United States, but understanding the history and how it connects to Europe and the
Mhm.
Caribbean and Africa. Having some grounding in that as a young person helped me find my voice. But still, even when those confines, I started with the age of hip hop. There were
Mhm.
Black people who didn't like hip hop. There were people who
Mhm.
were trying to like roll old CDs. I forget what happened to the particular person that had a stack of explicit lyrics, NWA, Public
Mhm.
Enemy, and they was like, "No, that's not right." I'm like, "Well, why is that not right? That's part of who we are." And so
Mhm.
for me, I've always tried to be authentic by incorporating music into my work
Mhm.
in terms of a part of a philosophy,
Mhm.
using the language and culture that comes from to put it into place, and then experimenting with trying to integrate those things in professional spaces. Like when I had early in my career, I had a half day pre-session of hip hop and leadership at
Mhm.
NASPA or ACP. I remember one at this time. So National Association of Personal Student Affairs Professionals, or
Mhm.
American College Press Association for those who are doing the acronyms and didn't know. And that was like really cool. But then there's pushback on that too. Like, does
Mhm.
this really belong? And so all of those iterations of trying things and experimenting and being told this is yes and we're no
Mhm.
shaped what I became my voice, but also it informed me in what I wasn't going to use as acceptable to do, be able to speak and be in
Mhm.
leadership positions. I also decided I'm going to be me in those
Mhm.
positions because I think when I, as a coach, I work with people and imposter syndrome, the thing that comes up a lot, especially for people of color professionals and women. And
Mhm.
one thing that you can always coach is if you know who you are and you're happy where you are, you
Mhm.
never have to be an imposter.
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
that's easier said than done. So
Yes.
part of my educational life has always been to how do I not only help young people learn, but how do I
Mhm.
help them when they graduate, when they have a job offer or graduate school offer, but more importantly, they have a sense of self of who they are and the kind of person
Mhm.
they want to be in the world.
Right.
And whether it was in education, whether doing nonprofit, grassroots organizing or electoral politics, whatever on my various different consulting, I want to make people feel good about who they are, so they can walk
Mhm.
upright in the world and then use that authentic voice and mix the diverse voice that we have in the world, because
Mhm.
those were the best ideas are being silenced by the ideologies of who can and who should and how. I think
Wow.
we need to let go of those things and really help people be their authentic selves so that
Mhm.
they can operate in a world with truth, operate in a world where they embody their leadership, embody their philosophies, they embody their spirit. And from that place, you can really do some good things to change the world.
Wow. You know, you as usual, you said a lot there.
I
I'm
apologize.
like,
Um,
no, 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 it's great. It's great. You gave me so much to think about, which is amazing. I do want to comment on the hip hop thing because I realize there are a lot of things I wonder. There are several schools of thought. Um, Especially when it comes to I compare my peers, for example, at historically white universities, and my peers at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. You see, I think that diversity of thought, predominantly the HBCUs,
mm,
um, where you have so many different types of black people from different walks that listen to the blues, that listen to jazz, listen to all kinds of different music. Part of the debate that I found also was, the idea that from my observation, it seems as if hip hop is also pushed. I mean, you also have hip hop at HBCUs, by the way, but almost at historically white institutions, you seem to see a little bit more of the dichotomy with hip hop and everything else. In other words, a different type of positioning.
hmm
Because one of the schools of thought is, surrounds the idea that hip hop was probably pushed in some ways, right, by mainstream media, mostly because of, profits and money, and almost, in some ways, there's a perspective that it sets up a design for what people want to box, black people
hmm
into, right? Because then you don't have to consider the diversity of Black people who listen to jazz, who listen to pop, who listen to um, blues, who listen to other things, you know, and on poetry,
hmm
it's definitely certainly you see all of that coming out,
hmm
in who we are, including hip hop. Um, and so I'm always wary and making sure that, we're not boxed in,
Yeah.
by those perceptions,
hmm
But it sounds like you really left academia to really find your voice,
hmm
and your journey reminds me a lot of mine, even though, I'm still in academia. Because I would like to think that your, um, your independent perspectives, would provide so much insights.
hmm
And I'm guessing that it posed some challenges.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
And just curious if you wanna highlight some of those. It's funny, I'm still talking about you because it's such an opportunity for me to really understand and to help people to understand
hmm
what that internal journey looks like for us.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I would say that I would, if I try to summarize part of my experience in organizations, I would say in general, but we can definitely focus on higher, is that there is a mission statement
Mhm.
and it's a vision statement.
Yeah.
And for me, the choice I made in my career was I am never going to be holding to an individual leader on campus. This is not a popular
Mm.
idea. I don't care what the provost said, and I don't care what the dean said. I don't care what the president said. And shout
Mhm.
out to those that may be listening that I like, but understand I didn't care because to me, I signed up for the mission and the vision of the institution. And
Mhm.
those things are generally far more reaching than what our individual capacities individuals are and
Mhm.
what we can tolerate. And so what it did was constantly create a strain. If this is the goal to create student diverse learning experiences that help our students, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to do
Right.
campus. I'm not trying to be friends with so and
Mhm.
so I can do some derivative of that goal.
Right.
That wasn't acceptable for me. And when you start
Mhm.
pushing against the institution and ask yourself, why are we accepting that the graduation rates for students of color are this and non-student of color are that?
Mm.
To me,
Yeah.
it's a deficit mentality. I don't have
Mhm.
anything in my mind I don't think the other students of color can't achieve. It
Right.
may require different pedagogical practices. It may require different supports. It may require different training for teachers and staff. But that idea exists, and it exists as a monolith that people just quote unquote believe and
Mhm.
understand to be true, quote unquote, and then that becomes the way they operate.
Right.
I don't. I don't accept that premise,
Mhm.
and because I
Wow.
don't accept that premise, that creates tensions with
Mhm.
your colleagues.
Right.
'Cause you're like, "What are you doing? This is ridiculous." And as a teacher, I've been with students and look at their writing. I'm like, "How did you get out of your freshman and sophomore year? And now you're in a course with me." And yes, all teachers should help support grammar, writing,
Mhm.
professionalism, etc. But some of the foundational things, I'm like, "How is this person
Mhm.
operating at a university in this
Mhm.
limited capacity?"
Right. Oh my gosh.
And then they meet me and I don't give you a grade. I write down what you earn. And so
Right.
if you earn a C or you earn a D, that's
Okay.
what you earn.
Wow.
That is the tension because there is something that happens in I think literal context that if
Mhm.
students come to you and tell you, their baby mama story or their grandma story and a novella about this. Not saying this disparagingly because we do have things that happen in life. But I always
Mhm.
tell people that I keep track of your grandkids, students, but your grandparents. So if you got 6 grandparents that have died in the course of a year, I'm like, wait a minute. Like
Yeah.
how many times you get sick? How many times can your
Mhm.
pet get hit by the
Right.
car? And I think sometimes when we are in liberal spaces, you want to give students opportunities to be able to navigate and help them with things you think that are happening in their life. And they very much
Mhm.
can be and are often are. They are
Mhm.
happening. But
Right.
how do we support them doesn't mean you pass them along.
No.
How you support them is to help them get through that time
Mhm.
and then create some other ways for they can catch up to the work because that capacity and the goal for their learning should never be altered because of where someone comes from.
Mhm.
I'm from a community in St. Louis, Missouri, um, in the city, and some recent work that
Mhm.
came out in a book about the broken promise and looking at urban America. They feature St. Louis, 18-year difference in life expectancy living in the city, St. Louis
Mhm.
versus the county. And so all the social determinants of health on Delmar Street, as a divide, or north and south, that
Mhm.
became a thing where you can look at all the negative social determinants of health at that line.
Mhm.
And you look at the difference that it means to be on the other side of that line.
Mhm.
And so, as a person in life and who understands those boundaries exist, I think it's important we don't let those boundaries be determinants of what people can become.
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
if they see you in a certain way, kind of the box, if you want to hip out the box, oh, he's just urban kid from this and he wants to do these things, and that's the only way they see you,
Mhm.
then that's going to be very limiting to the possible capacities of
Wow.
students. And so, how do we make
Absolutely.
sure we expose them to learning experiences and growth experiences while we still have to navigate life?
Mhm.
And I think that we sometimes liberal systems do it in individual ways. And I think the thing I try to do on campus is build communities amongst faculty, staff, and students so that when
Mhm.
students are experiencing things, we can help them with the resources, help them with the mentoring, help them with the supports in ways that are more dynamic and culturally grounded than just saying, okay, I'm going to excuse this behavior or excuse this performance because of this. No,
Mhm.
that happened and it wasn't good enough, or this happened and it wasn't your excellence. but we understand. So
Mhm.
now I'm gonna give you another opportunity to do this, but let's help you get this situated first as a human being and
Right.
take care of them as a whole person first, and then we can get to the learning. And sometimes I think
Wow.
that's compromise in the school setting.
Absolutely. And it's not just a school setting. I mean, we're
Which
talking
you,
about
yeah, that's true.
and you mentioned it too. We're talking about every
Every organization.
different level of
Mhm,
institution, organizations. We get to see the impact of that today, right?
mhm,
We get to see what happens when you have entire populations making
mhm,
big decisions about organizations, about countries, about states, right? Without fully developing the ability to examine evidence, the ability to make
evidence. What's
sure.
evidence?
I know, right? The ability to understand what it means to seek the truth, right?
Mhm,
The ability to put things in context
mhm,
and to think about it and make the necessary inferences that may or may not um, put together your emotional, right?
mhm,
And put together your cognitive
yeah,
in decision making. We see a lot of the dissonance, right?
mhm,
But again, only those who desire to perceive those distinctions
mhm,
get to see it. Only those who practice it get to see it.
mhm,
And I think this is I'm talking now, but it's a good segue into your work on Black emotional intelligence. And before I even mention that, well, you know what? I'll move on to that. I'm fascinated by the term, number one. I don't think I've really heard about it in terms of, in academic spaces. Um, and what you explained to me, tell us what what is Black emotional intelligence, and talk about the work you did, and how is that different
mhm,
from other kinds of
yeah,
intelligence? So yeah,
yeah. So the thing is, I think that your the idea of dissonance is, I think, very important.
the idea of
That
what
idea of dissonance.
dissonance.
Yeah,
Okay,
dissonance. Yes,
yeah.
that there's often these core beliefs,
Mhm.
and when they're at the core, it's really hard to change them.
Mhm.
And so, part of my work in emotional intelligence was that Donald Goldman and other people who advanced the research. And I'm a person who's an emotional intelligence practitioner. I work with 6 Seconds Emotional Intelligence Network. So this does not mean that it's not a good resource or a good framework. But it's a framework that didn't have people of color or women in mind when it was made.
Mhm.
And we had to always recognize that. And
Mhm.
so for me, Black emotional intelligence was, how would I step back and not just how do I apply Afrocentrism to self-awareness and social
Mhm.
awareness and empathy and the components of EQ. But what would it look like if you just built it from the start with
Mm.
Afrocentric ideas in place? And the reasons
Mhm.
for Afrocentricity is, I believe that Afrocentricity and its collective philosophies and tenets and practices are a way to have a better life as human beings working together,
Mm.
uh, any human being. In the same
Okay.
way that people may gravitate toward some Chinese medicines or meditations or
Mhm.
India yoga and Ayurvedic medicines, I think that you can learn from ancient Kemet and understand like what Saku could add to your life or West
Mhm.
African religions and understand how the Orishas, whether your belief system to understand patterns and ways to guide your decisions and actions. What will it start with if you just had an Afrocentric language to talk about your development? And
Mm.
because EQ, when it's talked about in Dan Goldman's eyes, like, oh, this is great. But can we look back in life and say, we're talking about social awareness and self awareness and, relationship management and social consciousness, empathy? Huh. As a fan of history, I'm like, wait a minute. Harriet Tubman probably had to have a lot of that. Frederick Douglass probably had to have a lot of that.
Mhm.
Ella Baker probably had to have a lot of that.
Mhm.
Martin Luther King probably had, like Byron Rustin, Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth. We can keep on naming people.
Yeah.
And so the exercise for me wasn't just to go back and trace or pre-examples of emotional intelligence as it's currently framed. It was to go back and say, how do we take those practices and knowledge that have already existed and put them in a framework that allows for our emotional sovereignty.
Mhm.
It still gives the opportunity to practice courage, gives us the
Mhm.
opportunity to have some cultural mastery in dealing with different people, and also
Mhm.
express a radical love. And
Mhm.
as not just in a romantic aspect, but like how bell hooks, how it becomes a transformational experience,
Mm.
have become a
Wow.
transformational power. And
Mhm.
so in building that, I started with Afrocentricity as an idea. I built
Mhm.
the pillars of practice of mindset, skill
Mhm.
set, feel set, and heal set, drawing from taking healing based leadership, going beyond
Mhm.
trauma, but really get to the healing part of it, get into some collective leadership practices that are embodied, they're spiritual, and they're collective in nature. And then that began the journey of what Black EQ becomes.
Wow.
And then
Mhm.
other impetus for it, which is also watching our community, and myself included, as we
Mhm.
deal with the rawness sometimes of society and navigating things. The emotional trauma can sometimes be too much. And
Mhm.
one of my favorite comedians, Dave Chappelle, and I love how he has this segment called "Keeping It Real Goes Wrong." And it's funny, but sometimes it's not funny. You see a person just go to that place and they can't stop, and they just go
Mhm.
further and further deeper, and it has these consequences. And
Mhm.
so, how could you also have a tool like emotional intelligence that will say, "Hey, what you are experiencing is true.
Mhm.
It's traumatic." But Black emotional intelligence is first one of the first philosophies in Ubuntu, not just you who you are.
Mhm.
You are because we are. So first of all, you're not in this alone.
Mhm.
Then we look at another
Yeah.
tenet of Sankofa, understand what can we borrow from our community, cultural wealth, and history to
Mhm.
bring us to the space. And then you got the naming force of Nomo, of trying to say, naming the experience we're having, name the
Mm.
situation so we can gain power over it, not be used
Yeah.
by it. And so
Wow.
that became part of the core parts of what emerged as Black EQ. But I
Mhm.
also saw it practice in my home, my parents or grandparents. I've seen it in practice with teachers. I've seen it practice with mentors. So
Mhm.
as much as it is something that I quote unquote created, but it's something that really has been created through my experience, lived experiences. And I'm just tapping
Mhm.
into the sources between the mentors I know living and past and get the ancestral wisdom and then
Mhm.
put it into practice. And then
Wow.
that way, Black emotional intelligence is a leadership framework as well as a way of life for me. And
Wow.
it's leadership
Mhm.
because we need leadership in all aspects of our life, whether it be your
Mhm.
community, whether it be in your home, whether it be in your church, whether it be in your school, whether it be your work, whether it be in your national organization, leadership. And I feel we're in a crisis of leadership
Mm.
because one, we don't understand leaderships,
Mhm.
but more importantly, because of ideologies and the dissonance of not wanting to change, it's hard to practice leadership in the ways that we should. Because
Mhm.
emotionally, we go back to our defaults.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
easy to do that.
Wow.
But it's much harder to actually tap into something more communal, something more rhythmic, something that is more spiritual. And those
Right.
things are important to who we
Mhm.
are as people, how we live in our communities, how we work together in our places of work, how we worship together or not together. These are core. And so I really
Mhm.
believe it's a way to look at ourselves and different spheres of being, because in Black AQ we have the individual understood as a person along with
Mhm.
community. Then you have the
Yeah.
community itself. You have understanding the sacred nature of nature and our ancestry. We do
Mhm.
also have systems thinking, and we're also future oriented. And those are the five dimensions of being. You have to be those things all the time. And what we're doing with
Mhm.
Black Q is not regulating ourselves to get along in those spaces. We're trying to remix
Mhm.
those spaces so they can become places
Mhm.
where people thrive. So they don't exist in
Wow.
what we do.
Wow. You said so many things there. Oh my goodness. One of the things you brought up for me is just the fact that so many frameworks are inadequate,
Mhm,
completely inadequate, to really explain our experiences, or they just don't go to the depth. And the dissonance in the thinking is in the perception that we can exclude those lived experiences and still theorize about them and
mhm.
expect them to be of depth, just because we need to be the people to actually derive it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things you and I have really approached this from opposite ends. I've approached it, you've approached it really seeking, you know, what that is from Afrocentric, and I've approached it from a different end where I either use multiple frameworks or show the inadequacy of other frameworks. And I find myself going more in this direction. Right now, one of the research I'm doing, brought up the importance of the social, the emotional aspects, and I'm exploring another framework. And what I'm finding is, yeah, these frameworks can describe things, but they don't necessarily go in depth for really what it means for us,
Mhm.
as Black people, especially since we, of all people, have really had to understand, um, become emotionally intelligent to
Mhm.
cope in this world. Whereas maybe someone can continue to persist on a surface level because the way is being cleared for them.
Mhm.
We've had to tap into those emotional intelligence to move forward. And so you said something about the benefits to us when it comes to understanding the Afrocentric ideas. I'm so curious if you can give some examples of what are the benefits,
Mhm.
and examples of how they came out. And you mentioned a bunch of different names. Some of it I recognize, some of them I don't. But we'll come back to that. Just
Okay.
just give us maybe it'll come up in you talking about the benefits. So what are some of those benefits and why should we consider going in that direction from your end?
Yeah. I mean, we can look on the surface and I think it's important to acknowledge that there's research out there that shows, your ability to deal with your emotions in whatever setting, whether it be the work or home, is important for people in terms of their
Mhm.
overall the
Yeah.
mental health. We
Mhm.
know from research on culture and difference that the ability to navigate differences is important in terms of work and life and business, especially in a global market that is becoming more and more increasingly intercultural on each day as technologies advances and opportunities increase for us to work together. And then we know from other work that somatically, the things we feel in our body, we hold them in certain ways. I think those individual emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, somatic awareness are all great, but they all are missing something.
Mhm.
They're lacking integration. And so in terms
Mhm.
of how you benefit, it becomes like how you integrate these different ideas into a
Mhm.
world. And some of
Yeah.
the benefits begin for me for in terms of how I look at Black EQ is that for one, when you go through a traumatic experience, you are not asked to deal with it by yourself. You are invited into community with others to help you navigate that difference. So the leader
Mhm.
doesn't hold leadership as a position of power. It
Mhm.
holds a level of authority within the organization or within the relationship or structure, with the
Mhm.
understanding that its true capacity and power is the collective.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
in some ways, leaders identify, and try to pinpoint certain types of personality characteristics or certain types of people to work in their jobs. But we also learned that it's really not about that particular characteristic or person. It's that person's ability to work in relation with others. And
Mhm.
so because Black EQ is also highly relational, it doesn't allow for you to have this charismatic or this great
Mm.
man theory of leadership. It requires you to be in community with others and understand your
Mhm.
leadership is only good as your relationships.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
then when we talk about, drawing from my ancestral history, we can then type into things um, like community cultural wealth as something that we use to navigate systems.
Mhm.
That research by Yoso that's been extended in many different communities. What does it
Mhm.
mean to have language capabilities or code switching? What does
Mhm.
it mean to have navigational uh, inheritance that you understand you can navigate things? What is the belief that comes with having a religious mindset that helps you overcome and grounds you in yourself as you go through different lives and tribulations? And so I
Mhm.
think Black Cube makes those things accessible in
Mhm.
ways that they're not often talked about or even named in specific
Mhm.
practices. So in some ways, meta theory is important to Black EQ, but it's
Mhm.
presented as a overall theory. But
Mm.
it's still grounded in certain things. And to me, the other part
Wow.
of that I wanted to highlight is just also because of Black feminism, Black womanism, African womanism,
Mhm.
those philosophies and those theories and methods of being in the world, in relation with the
Mhm.
world, also influence Black EQ. So that we're
Mhm.
looking at things where we can understand power, we can understand how we can have anger and frustration,
Mhm.
not as labeled as something that's negative to your experience, where you
Mhm.
say, no, let's use that anger,
Mhm.
as Audre Lorde we talked about.
Mhm.
And so how do we make the use of this anger and put it
Mhm.
into a place where it actually becomes helpful? Or something like Sheila
Mhm.
Sandoval, how do we use our differential consciousness and understand that we can operate in ways where we can push things away and create insulated moments, but also have the pendulation in life to be able to go into spaces and do our work and thrive and resist and persist, but then also have our community to come back to help us ground ourselves and keep us well. So in
Mm.
some ways, it gives you a healing centered, communal way, harmonious as the basic foundations. It's not about
Right.
individual success. It's about our
Wow.
collective ability to be able to support our successes in a variety of ways and holistically.
Wow. You know, it's it's amazing you said that because I don't think that if you had asked me, I don't know how many years ago, if you had mentioned that, a lot of times these labels, right, the community aspect, become cliche for many who haven't
Mhm,
really either experienced it or see the need for it. Um, and so, in some ways, this might be one of the first times, not the very first time, but, talking to you about it and have someone talk about it where I understand, where you're coming from,
mhm,
right? It's interesting because there's so much debate now because so many organizations are involved, whether it's churches, religion, or institution, other types of institutions. Um, and the interesting part of that is it's such an opportunity for everyone to just really redefine what's important to them
mhm,
and ask what's important to them. But redefine it in a way that says, okay, so what is the benefit, right? Am I becoming um, a better agent of myself?
mhm,
Am I loving others more? Am I hating them more? Right? And really redefining on an individual level how important this is. What I am finding personally is how important they're becoming in so many ways, or even the need for them if they're functioning in a
mhm,
way that can empower us. And then the examples I'm thinking of is, with even everything happening, I see that community, and even that church community as such a place to rest.
mhm,
Because you're in communion with people who you can look at each other and understand each other just we could just look and see,
mhm,
even just how equally tired we are and just really, and eat or break bread together and really realize,
mhm,
and derive a certain type of comfort from that. And, and listening to those stories, I had the amazing opportunity to celebrate for the first time, much night.
okay.
And the significance of that, and, just even having my son be a part of that and understanding what it was. Um, I mean, what an opportunity,
Mhm,
right? What an opportunity to remember something that is so important, and something that we take for granted, right? Our freedom, something that we wouldn't take for granted. But, you kinda brought up something else I'd love to segue into.
yes, please.
You focus on Black feminism
Oh, yeah.
as one of your other lenses, and I'm also fascinated by the fact that you do. And me, because I don't. That's not necessarily the lens I do, but I believe it's the lens I carry
Yeah.
as a Black woman. So please, talk about that. What is Black feminism, and why do you focus on it and
Uh,
or use that?
yeah, I think it's still being defined, but there's been people
Mhm,
who've taken some great, you know, leaps at describing it. There is the work, a new male feminist, Mark Anthony Neal. There's other work. I mean, Michael Eric Dyson has done it. There's was some work. Um, my little work that I've done in terms of constraints of adopting a feminist mindset. Um, as a, as I was writing my dissertation, um,
mhm,
I wanted to use feminism, Black feminism in particular, because of my strong connection to Bell Hooks and her work.
mm,
It just her work situating, understanding that justice can't exist without having women have the rights. And so for me,
mhm,
and beyond rights, but just being able to move in the world in the way they choose to move in the world, not
mhm,
constricted by male dominance. And
mhm,
so having strong women in my family obviously was part of that lens of like, oh, don't say certain things because you get told and put in your place very, very quickly. So that was
Mhm.
part of it.
Mhm.
But also
Wow.
intellectually, I saw the rift in real time. I've seen it
Mm.
in churches. I've seen it in different parts of the Black community. Is the issue of race and maleness most important,
Mhm.
or is the issue of gender and our children or sexuality most important? And I think
Yeah.
there's been a artificial divide as if those things have to be mutually exclusive. And I
Mm.
think what Black feminism did for feminism, it incorporated culture, and what Black feminism did for the Black power things and make the importance of women involved in understanding ideas about Black power. So
Mm.
it helped me see the world in a more authentic lens because I really didn't
Wow.
believe I could be a good person to teach someone else how to see through the lenses of people of color if I don't have to practice with the areas of my own privilege. And for me,
Mm.
black identifying as a Black male feminist is a is an aspirational goal.
Hmm.
It will never be finished for me. It's a constant reminder that if you're going to say this out loud, then your work should reflect it. How you embody it should reflect it. The things you choose to
Mhm.
do and what you talk about should reflect it. And so for me, it's a constant reminder of using this aspiration, something that's core to me, that the work I
Mm.
have to continue to do. So we can get rid of, we're talking about in my mind, as a Black male feminism, patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism, or I call it male PMS, is the problem.
Mm.
And if we can
Wow.
attack those things with a holistic nature, honesty and authenticity, it will
Mhm.
also help free ourselves as
Mm.
Black men and men of color.
Yeah.
And so it's just that for us to really realize what freedom is,
Mhm.
let alone get to liberty,
Mhm.
we have to abandon that construct that was given to us.
Mhm.
I think Bell Hooks in her book, Black Representation, talks about the roles that men were given, the cool, or to be like the master, or the roaming person, or the sexual desire. Like there was these boxes again.
Yeah.
And what does it
Mm.
mean to be a loving person as a man? What it
Yeah.
means to hug and love your friends, kiss them on the cheeks, to be able to be comfortable with other people's sexuality. All the things that confine men and violence against other men. Like all the things that happen. And we
Mhm.
still see it on like this is no diss because I want to make sure like I've never really gotten to podcasts. I only got the podcast very recently. And it was
Mhm.
because of things that was interesting to me. So like the Pivot podcast, All the
Mhm.
Smoke, the R&B Money podcast, like those are things that I enjoy.
Mhm.
Look, there's been so many times when there's conflict, and I'm gonna leave the R&B out of it, in the sports world as a former athlete, where if there's beef between people, they want to put gloves on or go outside. And I'm like,
Mhm.
why?
Mhm.
Why? Not saying you can't do it. Not necessarily not understanding why. 'Cause as a competitor, yeah,
Mhm.
I know what that feels like. The sports person in me, oh, really? You want some of this? Let's go out. Let's take care of this.
Mhm.
But is that really how we want to be in the world?
Yeah. Uh, It's that box.
If you can do it, yeah. But not can we do it? But why would we do it? Maybe we should, but why? What do we
Mhm.
gain from that? So if I have a conflict with somebody and we go outside and we box and I win or lose, the conflict didn't stop if I still have a different belief. All this happened, I have my same belief and I got my butt whooped. Or I have the same belief and I whooped somebody else's butt. Like that like, didn't change anything. And I think men have so many constraints on how we're supposed to act.
Mhm.
And this idea of being, the macho leader of the world, all that kind of stuff. It's in music, it's in songs. The idea exists. But what if you don't want to be that? What if you want to be a loving and caring person and just say, cool, you can have that thought. Like, I
Mhm.
don't want to fight you because it's not that serious. Like, what if we can then look at ways differently? And it's hard because
Mhm.
those things exist. Say if my younger grow up, my father like don't want you to fight, but if one wants to fight you, then you fight him back
Mhm.
because you don't want to be a target.
Mhm.
You make sure that they understand that this is the fight you don't want. I ain't got to
Mhm.
win, but they say that energy for that person is too much. I don't want to fight that person no more.
You're constrained by their thinking.
Yes. But then when you
Wow.
start thinking about other things, other ways of being, what are the other possibilities outside of that? So for me, in terms of understanding that the majority of violence in the world is caused by men, we understand that one in 4 or 5 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Under the assault
Mhm.
of somebody they know, and understanding that, the gender communication styles and all those things that make the world institutional policy things difficult and hard. As a man,
Mhm.
I have to be able to, one, recognize those things, and two, understand where I can decouple myself from those things. And then,
Mhm.
whereas three, the opportunities to now repair policies, practices, our dynamics, standing to models and ways that make other people be able to thrive in
Mm.
a situation, in an organization, or in a community, or in your own household. Like,
Mhm.
that is important. And that's the
Mhm.
relationship is the most important. So
Mhm.
why do I want to fight anyone? No, I don't want to.
Mhm.
I'd rather figure out how to work together and repair whatever's damaged or harmed us so we don't have that as our go-to
Mm.
or in our pocket. But it's hard to have in the society that we live in.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
like, I'm saying this, but like, I'm not, if I go outside today and somebody says something to me that's negative and calls me some kind of name as a person of color that doesn't jive with me, and I feel that it's threatening, doesn't mean I won't fight. Doesn't mean that.
Mhm.
So I'm still trying to unlearn it. But what do I do in situations that occur like that? What are the other options that actually will alleviate the concern in that moment as well in the future?
Wow.
And I think we should look for ways to do that,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah. You know, ways to have emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Or Black emotional intelligence.
Well, I think everybody needs it,
Yeah,
really,
and that's the thing, Black people intelligence for everybody. The other thing
Absolutely.
I wanna make sure anybody listening
Uh-huh.
understand,
Right.
please question yourself if you hear Black emotional intelligence and you hear your exclusion.
And
Because
you
I'll
hear
bet you
what?
that, and they hear if you hear Black emotional intelligence, if anybody listening and they hear exclusion, themselves
Mhm.
being excluded, here's the question. The core practices or mindset, feel set,
Mhm.
skill set, heal set.
Mhm.
The dimensions of being are the self in relation to others, the community, nature and ancestors, systems
Mhm.
and futures.
Mhm.
The sacred virtues or emotional sovereignty, compassionate courage, cultural mastery, and radical love. How can any human being, not see themselves in that particular configuration?
Because it probably doesn't benefit them monetarily to do so.
Well, yes. Well,
You
even with,
know?
like, yeah, and when our culture wars that we're having, if you name something as Black emotional intelligence, it's like, oh, you being exclusionary. No, I'm calling his name. His name. Nomo is one of the naming principles. It comes from an Afrocentric perspective. But
Yeah.
Afrocentricity and its collective principles can guide anyone in the world.
Yeah.
There's no
And
downside to it. It's only a
mhm.
communal upside. And
Yeah.
so people have to be willing to understand that emotion when they hear words that's might trigger them. Start peeling back what is happening in your own experience in life that makes this
Mhm.
difficult for you to understand.
Wow.
And it's for me, it's weird because Black emotional intelligence also comes from music, and
Mhm.
Black music is listened to around the world. One of the most, and us as musicians, whether it be blues, jazz, gospel,
Mhm.
whatever it could be, jazz, funk, punk, like most American music, we've had a really strong hand in developing it. And so
Mhm.
if you dig that, dig something else that comes with it. This
Mhm.
core of what makes that music great, I feel, comes from the Afrocentric, human being centered, collective, harmonious nature, naming problems, naming I things, the challenges, and actually figuring out remedies to overcome them.
Mhm.
Put it in practice in a different way in a
Mhm.
world of work.
Wow.
How would a leader, if they see themselves as being embodied, spiritual, ancestral, and collective as a leader, that must be a great place to lead from. I can say
Wow.
that's how I lead, and it feels like I'm never by myself. I feel like
Mhm.
I got people who to work with. I got people who actually know things more than I know, and that's great. And they can take the opportunity to take the lead in those areas. That's
Mhm.
what it could be. If you look at certain generals research, like 76% of people have some mental health challenge, and like another 60 some percent of their work is a high number. High. And it's costing organizations $3 billion a day,
Mhm. Yeah.
calling the globe, $1 trillion, why? Wouldn't it just be easy to work in harmony? Easy to work in good relations. It'd be easy to work with a communal spirit.
Well, it should be, but when you're not used to solving your problems, um, by allowing yourself to acknowledge your strengths, then our presence becomes problematic.
Mhm.
But if in doubt, there are a couple of things you could think about. I think about some of the more successful Black men who have been open. I should let me phrase this: the more successful Black men who have retained and um, their character in the process of
Mhm.
being successful, often talk about the boundaries, the healthy boundaries, the healthy examples that have been set for them,
Mhm.
by their mothers. That would be such a interesting study, right? Looking at all of the role of,
Mhm.
different mom, and if in doubt, think about who might be honest and upfront with you in perhaps setting boundaries in some ways at the same time,
Mhm.
as opposed to allowing you to um, continue down the road because we're afraid of what you think.
Yeah, and I would say, and I would use it in Black EQ, I would frame it as be intentional in relationships you choose that allow you to have boundaries. If you're choosing
Mm,
relationships that make boundaries hard, you might choose different relationships
yeah, you'll
or
pay for it later.
choose a different, or definitely, or come into, if I'm going to be in a relationship with you, be clear about what that means for you, as
Hmm.
opposed to always trying to just deal with the relationships we have.
Hmm.
We don't have to hold those relationships the way we hold them. We can seek new ones, and we can
Yeah.
transform our existing ones.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be how it is, but we have to be very intentional. Thing like
Right.
success for us is often looked at as an achievement of a high position or a
Hmm.
bunch of money.
Right.
And then we'll say things like, thank God. We went to Oscars last night, thanking Jesus. know, we're thanking, the producers, we're thanking the
Hmm.
finances. But many of the people you see on stage, you saw them other quiet moments. You might see them on TV or interviews. They talk about the influential person in life, their mother or their father, or a particular
Hmm.
teacher or a community leader or a church leader that's
Yeah.
not famous, not doesn't have glamour, doesn't name is not known. But
Hmm.
without that person, they could not have become the person who they are.
Hmm.
And I think that when we talk about success, one thing I'm trying to do in Black EQ is make sure success doesn't have to equal a bunch of money. The,
Mm.
the school principal that can consistently put out kids that are college ready in these urban landscapes is important.
Hmm.
The security guard that knows all these kids, that helps them go across the street back
Hmm.
and forth each day and hear their discussions and intervenes on their behalf and then tells them what not to do because we're a community and helps them become a better people, they are important. And
Hmm.
grocery store shop owner, the small business, like all those things are important. But we only
Hmm.
tend to highlight like when we get to a certain level of quote unquote excellence. All the great professors that I ever had that influenced me, that higher ed made between $75 and $100,000, and they are coming in every day to work and taking on kids like their own kids and work. They are important,
Hmm.
and we can't talk about success. We can't talk about community if we don't include those other people who may have a different point in terms of where they're at and what we use as common characteristics of success, but they
Hmm.
are immensely successful in how they've helped
Hmm.
so many people be better.
Absolutely. And I mean, we see the need for it too when we think about different forms of policing going
Oh, yeah.
on in society today that
Mhm.
all need Black emotional intelligence,
Yes.
um, to, to demonstrate and to have those boundaries for oneself,
Mhm.
right? That would allow them to respect another person. Um, very important. Wow. So, well, this was an amazing conversation. I think we can go on and on. Um, I'm looking to see what other questions we have.
One
Um,
one thing I wanted to share,
yeah.
just to complete the picture of Black EQ,
Mhm.
is that music and musicking is
Mm.
key to Black emotional intelligence. Um,
Mhm.
the idea of music is that, we listen to music. Music King begins us to entertain what does it mean to not only listen to music together, the call and response,
Mhm.
but everyone that's involved in the process of
Mhm.
listening and hearing consumer music, the ticket takers, the stage hands, all those people, the community come out and support, the radio people, all of that. But then that's what the
Absolutely.
metaphor for working together.
Mhm.
Music now says, how do we be in rhythm with each other? How do we
Mhm.
create harmony with each other? How do
Mhm.
we navigate the dissonance when things happen? How do we find that resonance to pull it back together? How do we learn how
Yeah.
to improvise? Like, how do we learn to hold down the pocket? Like, there's different roles, and we use the terminology Black EQ because it's more accessible than a lot of other terms, but also it's an easy metaphor to help people understand that
Mhm.
music is something that we can consume. It's a universal language. So as ways emotions are universal, music is also universal. So as for me, as a
Wow.
person who plays music and as a musician who writes music, it was important that, Black EQ features music king and music in its core, but
Mhm.
also one of the reasons that there'll be a soundtrack that will come on each iteration of Black EQ. So there will Black
Mhm.
EQ learning program. There'll be leadership in hip hop. There'll be conflict rhythm and blues. These are all things that will be released and work within the public in coaching and leadership development to help
Mhm.
people understand how music is the great metaphor to understand, but it's also music king is a practice we can do with how we speak to each other, how we relate to each other, how we share information with each other, and hopefully how we all come together ultimately to get something accomplished and live lives
Wow.
that have quality of life and well-being, despite
Mhm.
also understanding that music is a medicine in terms of what it
Wow.
does for our nerves and our parasympathetic systems and
Mhm.
things that it offers us to mood regulation, depression, pain relief, etc.
Mhm.
So that's very important to include because one of the things too that you talked about in the beginning is having boundaries. See, Black
Mhm.
she doesn't want any boundaries. It can be musical. It can also be,
Yeah.
it could be spiritual. It can
Absolutely.
be understand nature. And
Mhm.
those are not things that are exclusive to the discipline categories. They are part
Mhm.
of our overall life. And that's why they should be part of our overall thinking of how we relate to each other in life.
Wow. You'll be pleased to know I've kept my son in music for that reason.
Good.
I've kept him in piano classes. What an amazing way to self-regulate as well,
Hmm.
and I get to see all the things he's learning, as he does that, and um even conversations he has with his piano teacher. You know, what an amazing, I want to say though that I've brought this up before, but I want to bring it up again. We get to see the importance in HBCUs, right? The different types of music that each different HBCUs emphasize. And I know a lot of colleges have their college bands, but HBCUs, and I'm sure other colleges do take it to a next level,
Hmm.
using music to bond in some way, right? With each emphasizing, you know, different types of genre.
Hmm.
And I say this to say that I've always wondered why it was taken out of public schools, and I wish I could be a fly on the wall, or maybe even a fly on the thinking
Oh, I
of
tell you,
that led it to, because it's so important to the Black community. But go ahead, you're getting excited. Go ahead.
you're making me so happy. This is not, you can't end the interview now. I believe it was an intentional I think it was intentional. I think what you're saying
Mhm.
about your own son's experience is something that my mom made sure all of us we had rules, in the house. So we all went to church. We all
Yeah.
had to play a sport. And we all had to learn an instrument. That was part of the package in the Carter household. You could pick
Mhm.
what sport, you pick which instrument, whatever, but you had to do those things. When we look
Mhm.
back as a language for us, and the work of Leroy Jones, Mary Brock, he talked about he has a book called Blues People, and he talked
Mm.
about if you want to look at the quote unquote Negro experience in America, the best place to look is in our music because our
Mhm.
music chronicles all aspects of our lives.
Mhm.
And so think about it as a language that we
Mhm.
didn't necessarily have
Absolutely.
because the West Africa and different tribes brought, the dispersed throughout Latin America, Caribbean, United States, etc. We lost some of that. But our musical
Mhm.
practices, the polyrhythm nature, the call and response, those things didn't really go away. The flair for
Mhm.
words, the idea of the griot, like those things were retained with us. And that music
Mhm.
is the core of the language that we speak. When we took it out of schools, it was like taking part of our language with us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there's a consequence to that. And that was some reason for me, motivation for why I wanted to put it back in my mind. What emotional intelligence is like this needs
Mhm.
to be part of the language we need because universally we can understand emotions.
Right.
Universally, but also
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. I certainly believe that because it was so important to us, it became this opportunity. You know, there, I really, one of the patterns I keep seeing repeatedly and it keeps coming up is the extent to which if something enriches us, it's such an opportunity for others to create an economic pipeline for themselves, right? Where we can no longer benefit, but now we'll have to pay because the pattern is we are a means to an end, you know? And I personally believe that that's why we don't have AI rules just yet. I think people are trying to figure out how to have rules that would benefit them without benefiting us. And I say that because that's just been the pattern, you know, having to do my research in STEM education and delving a little bit into history. All you have to do is just do a little bit of spurts in different places and you begin to see that there's a pattern, there's a connection um, that bounds decision making, right? Um, that it's hard to dismiss,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, I think that what AI, the impacts it has on, the environment and energy is we're starting to learn more about it.
Mm-hmm.
The aspect of it that I think it offers some potentiality for people is just like hip hop and the way that it made music offered a whole generation a new way to make music. I think
Mm-hmm.
AI will have similar opportunities for us mastering a different language, AI itself,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how it's
Right.
prompt, how it's used to also help develop our voice and make sure that we can be representing ourselves in ways that currently don't exist or in ways that are misinformed. Because
Right.
you train your AI. For the
Mm-hmm.
AI tools I use, most of them have been uploaded with everything I've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
just thoughts. It's all the
Which
books
is
that I
which is
like.
freely available for others, but yeah.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
so at one point at Black EQ, I do imagine some kind of artificial intelligence that's just all knowledge of the Black diaspora in multiple languages.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Awesome.
open, it's available, it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
No one has to go to a class. You don't have to go to the ends to hire a consultant like me. You can go to
Mm-hmm.
a repository and learn whatever you want to know about your culture
Right.
from authentic resources
Mm-hmm.
and learn about the world from a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Um, I know that you are getting ready to launch a coaching, right? Is that something you're working on? Do you want to say a little bit about that and
Yeah. So
what people should look out for?
yeah, as part of the Black Emotional Intelligence Experience, we're going to be having some coaching courses that come out for leadership development. And leadership again is not just at work. Whether it be you want to be a better leader at work, want to be a leader in your church, be a leader in your community center, your fraternity or sorority, whatever it is.
Mhm,
Um, and it's going to be there's two offerings that will be happening beginning in April. One on just Black EQ as a general understanding of of the pillars of practice, the virtues, leadership capacities, and the practices,
mhm.
but also the specific offering on leadership and hip hop. And we'll be offering
Okay.
a 6-month experience where we go through leadership using hip hop as our vehicle to think through different strategies and
Mhm.
practices and skills that are necessary to be an effective leader.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, and right now, if you want to go to my the website, blackemotionals.com, there is a
Mhm,
button at the bottom that says Black EQ Reset. Reset for those who are
mhm,
familiar with Martin Lawrence or the cultural phrase of woosah, of relaxing yourself. It's a interactive somatic reset where you can talk about what's going on with you, name your emotions, get some
mm,
somatic breathing, get some attentions, and get some adinkra symbols, philosophies, and African proverbs to help guide you in that moment. Doing things to bring tools, not only that are
mhm,
paid, but also things that are free tools is part of what I want to
mhm.
have in the Black most intelligence offering so that people can access it and not have the things of means being a way that you interferes with your ability to be able to get some knowledge and some practices that can help you, your community, and your family, and your workplace.
Wow, that's awesome. Wow. So before we end, any last things you wanna say or any questions you have for me, before you any takeaways you want to leave? Um
I'm gonna say that at some point, uh, Catherine and I, we're going to collaborate on some music together. She does music too. So I'm gonna say it out loud and put it out in the atmosphere so it becomes true. No more. So at some point we're going to collaborate on something, and we're going to have an opportunity to come
Wow.
back here and talk about it.
What? That sounds good. Maybe you'll push me to push out. I think I'd mentioned the 8 songs that I had written.
Yes, you did. I kept very good track of that.
What's that?
I did. That's why I brought it up. I was interested in your music. I'm like, okay, she skipped over this kind of. I want to make sure that I be clear, listeners. I want to collaborate with Catherine's music, and I want something for her to contribute to the Black EQ soundtrack. Now
Wow.
I've said it out loud.
Oh my goodness. That sounds great. I do look forward to that. Wow, that'll be interesting. I think the music has been trying to break out of me, and I've been still holding back a little bit, and I just need to go for it. Part of it is time, just to go for it and just put it all out there. I had written these probably over 26 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and need to get them out and then go to the next phase where I can collaborate with you. So that will be your sign. When you see me push those out, then I'm ready for the next phase.
Okay, and I'll give you little pushes along the way because I think part of the process in this Black emotional intelligence thing for me was also like being true to yourself, and so
Mhm.
where did my
Yeah.
music fit in my methods? And I had to make sure that was included
Wow.
because that's part of how I stay grounded. It's how I stay happy. It's how I stay regulated. It's how
Mhm.
but it's also the way
Same.
others do. And you can share it. Anybody writes a song, a musician often wants to do it for other people. You'll have other
Wow.
people get something from this. And so what better way to practice that giving and allowing vulnerability to others to practice it through music?
Wow. That's amazing. Wow. I feel like I feel like you're my male counterpart there.
Well,
Everything you
let's
said.
collaborate. Let's
What's that?
collaborate. So we're on the same page.
Absolutely. I think that will be exciting. You mentioned such important things there, which are so important for community, and so one of the benefits of community is that you learn to be vulnerable,
Hmm.
and set boundaries at the same time in constructive ways.
Yeah.
And okay, I think that's a great way to end.
Okay.
Wow. So, Dr. Carter, thank you so much
Thank you
for
for having
joining
me.
today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed my time. Look
Absolutely.
forward to us working together in the future.
Likewise. And if you like this episode, please subscribe and like, so you can hear about the next one.
Yeah. Tell your friends.
Absolutely.